Hello, this is Samantha Nolan-Smith. I am just waiting to check that we are live. The computer seems to be going slowly, but I think we're there. I am the CEO and founder of the School of Visibility, and I wanted to do a quick video today to chat about how do you speak up, how do you show up, how do you be visible in a world that is so fractured, that is so divided. How do you even look for middle ground? Do you look for middle ground? Is there middle ground? These are the kinds of things, because I know that so many people are sitting in one of two places. There are people who are finding their voices and they're finding connection to social justice that maybe they haven't expressed before in their work or in particular arenas. And as they do that, there's a real it's about boundary setting. It's about getting really clear about what you do and what you don't stand for. And that's one group of people. And I know that there's another group of people who watch that and are like, oh my God, one, am I going to have to do that? Or two, that feels too sharp, that I don't know how to do that. And then there are another group of people who are thinking, but how do we take forward this idea of healing, and how do we find a way to actually come together and be not, we don't have to all be on the same page, but how do we at least move forward with some level of humanity and respect and so forth. And I think these are wildly important considerations for you as a human being, as a member of society, and as a business owner, because every single person in your community is having these challenges, is trying to work these out for themselves, whether in their relationships with their family members or in their relationships at work or wherever it might be, or they're wondering how they hold these conversations in their own communities. So the thing that I think there are a couple of things I think that we need to remember. One is there are different conversations that are serving different purposes. Some people are finding a new form of expression with their voices, and when you go through that phase, you tap into some personal power, which means that you find a different voice. In that space is not about how do we compassionately heal, how do we solve all the problems of the world or whatever. It's about personal power. It's about self-expression. And if that's not the phase that you're in, or if you're of a personality type that feels very confronted by that, then maybe they're not the conversations for you. Maybe that's not where you need to spend your time. But just know this, that moving through that space of personal power and personal expression enables you to come to the next form of self-expression. That's not the end of the game. What you're seeing now with lots of people being very, what I would call very one-ish on the Enneagram, which is like there's right, there's wrong, here are my boundaries. I'm not saying that there's a problem with that. I think it's important to set boundaries. I think it's wildly important to be clear about that with your community and in your business generally. And it's an avenue to something else. It's not an end game. What it's an avenue then to is compassionate expression, compassionate way of communicating with the world. So you can still you ground that in your sense of personal responsibility and personal power, and then you connect with other people from your heart center, and that is a way that I think everybody's at different points on that. Some people are further back in that cycle where they're back at the point of, I'm not even sure if I can express myself in a way that's powerful. I feel very nervous about doing that. I feel very nervous about putting people off, upsetting people and so forth. So I want to encourage you to know that it's an evolutionary thing in the sense that it's part of a person's personal growth to go from being fearful about expressing themselves to finding your voice to being able to use that voice in compassionate ways. So you see that journey there. So one of the things that you want to do, particularly on social media, where the chaos of social media can be breathtaking, recognize which conversation you're having right now. Where are you, and where can you actually just step back? Because I don't need to be having that conversation now with those people. That's not where I am in terms of what I'm focused on. Which part of my personal growth am I focused on? So I think that's really important. And to then give people a little bit of space to be in their own, whatever their personal growth, wherever they are in their journey. That's the first piece. But when you come to the point where you want to have these more conversations grounded in some sense of understanding of you're a human being, I'm a human being, can we find a way forward? One of the things that I spoke about, I think it was yesterday, was could we move away from a conversation about right and wrong? Because the right and wrong naturally entrenches people. I myself am absolutely convinced of my own social justice perspective. I think that is right. And I know that there are many people who have a different perspective and they think they're right. So trying to have a conversation about what's right is never going to get us anywhere, because we're just going to both go like this. I'm going to say, well, I'm right. And you're going to say, you're right. And, and I'm really, I had those conversations for many, many years with people, and it got me nowhere. I would just get me upset. It would entrench them further in their perspective. It would entrench me further in my perspective. There was no progress as human beings. And so now I'm looking at this idea of, well, what if we could have a different conversation? What if, instead of right and wrong, what if we could have a conversation about how do you prioritize your values? And why do you prioritize those values over other values? So let me give you an example of that. I have a value, one of my highest values is kindness. And another one, and why do I do that? So that would be the next thing. Why I value kindness is because it comes from a whole range of things, including personal experience where people were very unkind to me as a child, and not family, but school friends. And that taught me the value of kindness, of just really simple acts of kindness. Because when you're going through an experience where you're being bullied, for example, you notice the acts of kindness. They're rare and they're small, and just occasionally people where there's like a whole swarm of, this was like a whole swarm of people, and they were gathering more and more people together to, be anti-Samantha. And every now and again, one person would just look over at me and give me a smile, or they would say, just come over here. They would quietly do it, but they'd say, come over here at, at lunchtime or whatever. And that taught me the power of kindness, of small acts of kindness being absolutely so, so important to me. So that's why when I look at people speaking up and I don't see kindness, I instantly am like, why is kindness not their highest value? But do you see how if I can talk to you from that place and say, well, this is why I care about kindness, and you can come back to me with a conversation about, well, this is why I care about, so a conversation I've had with family members, with many people, is why is money the very top of your priority list? And often why it is the very, very top priority is because it's security. It's because I feel very afraid to be in the world if I don't have, if I don't prioritize money, I'm really terrified that then eventually I'm going to end up homeless on the street, whatever it is. Now, if you consider conversations between traditional left and right in politics, it's not a conversation that goes like that. It's not a conversation that says, I'm afraid that if you don't prioritize the economy, I'm going to end up on the street. They don't talk about their fear and therefore their motivation for that being the highest priority. And the left doesn't say, I'm really afraid if you prioritize money over everything else, all human being, like half the world is going to end up forgotten and left behind, and I'm going to end up in a society where only a few people ever get to realize their dreams. And I'm scared of what that looks like. And so this is why I prioritize services above economics, blah, blah, blah. So think about that in your own community. Think about that for the industry that you're in. Think about that in terms of what you're talking about with your people. How can you draw out more of why is that your priority? How have you come to the conclusion that that is the most important thing and why? And then how have you come to that? And then what I think happens is you come to a point of seeing somebody more clearly because you invite them to show you their vulnerable side. You invite them to show their vulnerable self and the things that they desperately need you to see, because these are the things that are like, if you can't see my fear around this, then we can't meet, because you're not meeting my fundamental core need to have that taken care of. I think an entirely new conversation evolves when we start from that place, of tell me about what your values are, tell me about why they matter to you, and then how do we then build a world, an environment, recreate an industry, whatever it is that we're doing. How do we challenge the way things have been before by taking all of that into account? How do we find that? I think that is where we find middle ground. I would love to hear what you think about that. I have got this comment. There we go. I don't even know if my comments are set. I always seem to have problems with my comments. But if you have comments, I'll come in, and I would love to have more of a conversation with this. I really want to encourage, particularly in our community, the School of Visibility community, to be leading the way in terms of finding a new way forward that isn't about you're right, you're wrong, we're just never going to find a way forward from here. I just don't believe that the world is served by that. I want to fall into that a lot of time because I get so enraged and I get so distressed about some of the things that I have seen people express. But I know that if I stay in that space, nothing will change. Nothing will change. I studied ancient history and I studied modern history, and I know where that leads the world, and I don't want us to go anywhere near that. So how do we recreate conversation? How do we couch our conversations differently? I think that there's so much that we can learn from. There's so much that I'm going to have a chat with one of my friends about restorative justice and about sitting in circle in ways that Indigenous peoples have done forever around finding that middle ground. Not finding that middle ground, that's a mischaracterization of what that is, of having hard conversations and having them as a community, and moving forward together as a community. Katrina, I love this, Samantha, this really resonates. So my question then is, in my community, do I need to be going to the leaders who I disagree with on water and trying to have these conversations with them? Yeah, so it's an interesting question of where you start that conversation. And I think that that's really what it's about. Do I start this conversation with the people who I know are very entrenched in their perspective? Do I have this conversation with people who are somewhere in the middle? I quite like the idea. If it's deeply entrenched, one and the other, and I know what you're talking about, and I know it is, sometimes what the first step, I think, is to find a few more middle people. So have a couple of people who will continue to support you in bridging. And sometimes what I found for myself in community work over the years is I would have to find somebody who, if I knew there were a couple of people who were really entrenched in their perspective, I'd have to find somebody who I knew they respected. And then, but I knew that that person, the one they respected, also was open to hearing my perspective. Do you know what I mean? So let's say there's like you here, there's other people here who you're trying, the leaders you want to have a conversation with, but there's someone else that's like a mutually respected person. And sometimes what I had to do is I had to utilize the mutually respected person to bring everybody to the table. Then when I could do that, then there would be conversation. But it has to be somebody. I'm thinking about all the work that I did with Aboriginal communities. It was always an elder. It was always somebody who was respected by all parties and who could hold the conversation, who could hold the space for the conversation, who could facilitate it. And then I could choose to then come to that conversation. I wasn't one side or the other. I was normally facilitating 3 or 4 different Aboriginal community groups that were not talking to one another. So I was like trying to find a way to do that. It wasn't appropriate for me to be the person to hold that space, obviously. I'm not Aboriginal. So I always had to find that peg person. Now the question I think, Katrina, for you is, can I be the peg person, the person who everybody respects and then gathers around? Or is there somebody in the space that then can act as that, and then I can come to the conversation and contribute from that place? So working out where am I at the moment? How am I perceived by the other side? Is there a way forward? The other thing that I think is really important to do, sometimes I've found this useful in, again, facilitating these kinds of in fractious communities was, or fractured communities. I don't put any of that, I just want to be clear, I don't put any of that, I don't want anybody to misunderstand what I'm saying when I talk about working with fractured Aboriginal communities. That is a result of the legacy of colonisation and needs to be understood as such. The other thing that I found useful is sometimes it wasn't about having a full-on public conversation. It was just about having a conversation with 1 or 2 important people in a community. And that was more about sitting down, having a cup of tea. That was like, can we find some middle ground here? And then what would happen is, then they would then go and have a cup of tea with someone else, and then they'd go and have a cup of tea with someone else. And then when we finally came to a public conversation, everybody had found some connection point by the time they got to the meeting. So it wasn't about trying to resolve it all in one hit, in one environment. It was about trying to little by little by little by little. Let me know, Katrina, if that is helpful, or if you have any other questions about that. So we've been talking, and before we wrap, we've been talking about how we move forward, how we understand different spaces and different conversational spaces that are happening, and recognize they're not all for me, and they're representative of where different people are in their journey of using voice, speaking up, in their journey of empowerment, of feeling empowered to express themselves, feeling like they have permission to express themselves. This is happening all over the world in many, many, many different forms, in many different guises. Yes, I have someone in mind who would be exactly perfect for this, and actually maybe it would be cool to start circle meetings here. I really love this thinking. Yes, wonderful, wonderful. All right, so we will continue to have these conversations. I've spoken before about a lot of the work we do is around being a bridge person at the School of Visibility. It wasn't something that I anticipated when I first started the School of Visibility, but what I have discovered is that it's often the bridge people, the people who are bridging worlds, who have some of the greatest visibility blocks, because it's easy to be entrenched and be like, I stand for this and you stand against us, or I stand for this and you stand against us. But to be in the middle and say, actually, let's find some middle ground, that then you can often get attacked from both sides. So there's a challenge, a visibility challenge associated with that, and I'm here for that in terms of supporting you, because the more and more that I'm in the world of the world, the more that I'm convinced that the bridge people are the people that we absolutely need to help us to move forward as societies, families, nations, global world. Okay. If you have any more comments or questions, I'll be back in that all week, and I'd love to keep chatting with you.